Okay, we in session. We are in session.
Thank you and good afternoon. Welcome to an emergency session of Littleton Select Board, June 9th, 2023, 4 p.m. This evening we will be going over with the Littleton Electric Light and Water Department Commissioners' status update regarding negotiations with the Lipoli companies regarding reserved sewer capacity agreement and grant funding memorandum of understanding for the Littleton Sewer System Expansion Project. And secondly, we will get into a discussion and potential select board vote on our memorandum of understanding with Lipoli companies regarding utilization of grant funding for the Littleton Sewer System Expansion Project. So I'd like to, first of all, thank everyone for coming out on a short notice on a Friday afternoon. Really appreciate it, but this is absolutely necessary to get this moving, and I recognize the urgency of it as the rest of the board did, so thank you all for coming out. To that effect, I'd like to, actually, Ryan, just kind of have you give us a quick synopsis of what changed from Monday and where we're, is that fair?
I think on Monday, we voted to support the reservation agreement.
Correct.
Subject to town council's
Yep, and that's been done.
support. That's been done. So, I mean, I think this is just kind of a rubber stamp, if nothing else, with the
We're here to
LWD.
just support your board.
Yep.
But the MOU is something
Correct.
that the MOU is something that we, it was, I think,
And if I could, so,
Yes.
yeah, so Chuck's right. So there was the sewer reservation agreement,
Yep.
which we would refer to town council's review and update town councils on this call so they could opine on that. And in addition, the other thing that might be is a little different as well as we're proposing a memorandum of understanding between the town and 550 King Street regarding payment for the $9.5 million in MassWorks grants. So there's a little bit of a change with that, but we wanted to bring that to you so that the board would know what that agreement is and what the expectation that both parties have of each other moving forward. So we were able to, we really tried to, as you mentioned, this is an emergency meeting. We're really working diligently in partnership with the Foley Company, and lots of meetings trying to get these pieces together. And I think where we're at is a good place. You know, with that, I think probably, if it's okay with you, Chair, to turn it over to Town Council.
Yes, absolutely.
Tom Harrington, to get his perspective on where we are and what needs to be done tonight.
All right, thank you. Mr. Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, from my perspective, I was not at your Monday meeting, but I believe what came out of that was the idea that there would be a single agreement, and that single agreement was a combination of a capacity reservation agreement and contained much of what you now see in the MOU. So since that time, there's been a lot of, you know, kind of real-time
Tom,
negotiations.
can I stop you? That's not what was agreed on Monday.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, let's I guess talk.
Why don't you tell me what you agreed to on Monday, and I'll tell you what's happened since.
Okay. So I can give that a shot. So what was voted on Monday was, first, the select board to support the LALWD, Water Commissioners vote to authorize the LALWD general manager to execute a contract with Methuen Construction and then Rivoli separately. Same language, basically, contingent upon the Board of Water Commissioners executing a reserved sewer capacity agreement with 550 King Street. So that's one of the documents that we've been working on and that has been revised. So that, Tom, does that make sense?
Yep.
So that was our support, vote of support on that.
Right, okay, so you took that vote of support, and at that time, it was a single document. It's now been split into two documents. So.
No.
No.
No,
It was always going to be two.
it's, yeah.
I'm sorry, it was,
It was going to be a tri-party agreement in the reservation document.
Okay, all right. I take that correction, and so from a drafting perspective, the reservation agreement has been stripped down of kind of any reference to the MassWorks grants, and so now the reservation agreement, after kind of the real-time negotiating that's been going on, is meant to be a very straightforward, clean, vanilla agreement assigning 455 REUs to 550 King Street. So we'll set that one aside and look at the MOU. The MOU now is not a tri-party agreement. It's just between the Select Board and 550 King Street LLC. And the purpose here is to describe how the MassWorks grants will be used in connection with both the funding of the construction of the sewer system and in funding projects meant that would occur on public property that would be performed by Littleton. So it's public contracts on public property, using the grant money to fund that. And the essential mechanism here is, originally, we have some $9.5 million in MassWorks grants that Lapoli Companies has worked to get for the town. Originally, those monies were assigned as part of the payment structure for the sewer system. What we have done here is essentially taken that part, well, those will remain as part of the funding mechanism for the sewer system until such time at 550 King Street's option that they provide us with a letter of credit for $9.5 million. Once we receive that letter of credit, we've then agreed to pursue projects, again, public property with public contracts on public property that will benefit Lapoli, and I believe the likely candidate is road work throughout the site.
The infrastructure that's explained in the bill, correct? That's how it's explained in the bill.
Forward bill.
The forward bill that came out, the infrastructure for that, specific to that project.
Well, I think this is, we haven't defined it. Yeah, so we would
Okay.
have to do something that complies with what the bill says, right? So
Right.
we'll have to do with that. I think this is probably more of a fine tuning
Okay.
because the infrastructure is specifically the road work. So what will happen is we'll get the letter of credit. We'll then execute contracts to do the road work at a cost not to exceed the value of those grants, $9.5 million. So the letter of credit now backstops the sewer project. It's considered last money in, so that we will expend the other funds we have available for the sewer project until there are $9.5 million left on the sewer project. At that point, we'll start sending invoices to 550 King Street. They have 14 days to pay those invoices so that we get the money to pay the contractors. If they don't, we'll just directly tap into the line of credit and use that to pay the invoices. So that last $9.5 million comes, is backstopped by a line of credit, but will come from Lapoli as the last money in for the sewer construction.
Okay. And this is how Light and Water understand it as well, commissioners?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is more of your board's decisions.
Right.
But in all the meetings, in all the negotiations, and all the conversations, yes, that's how it is.
And I know Attorney Gould, you're representing Lapoli Companies here.
Mr. Lepoli's here, but
But okay,
that's generally
excuse
what
me.
we've been talking about.
This is, okay. Just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page before we make any final decisions. But okay, I want to open it up to the board. Questions, I know this was fast-paced over the last few days, but any questions regarding what's in front of you. It was explained to me off the record, so I kind of understood at least the premise of why we were doing this and what became of it, so I want to hear your comments or questions.
So, my understanding, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong here, is, so the sewer's $47 million. If it comes in at less than 47 million, that, we're still paying, the town's still paying 47, and the other is on the line of credit, it's in infrastructure work at 550. It's not reducing the sewer amount by that much. That's the way I'm reading the agreement. You could correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think part of that is part of that agreement, because part of the sewer project is this infrastructure that comes up through the center.
No, I mean, well, the sewer project has
Right.
$8 million in contingency, something like that, probably, right?
No,
If we,
less than that.
well, if we don't spend the contingencies, the project cost doesn't go down. Is that correct?
Sure it does.
The way this, how does it go down in this agreement?
We'd borrow less money.
But we already had to spend our money before we spend this 9.5.
Yeah, it might be a timing, I see what you're saying with timing, but, yeah. I mean, we worked it out with the town, with Napoli. The 9.5's coming back to the sewer. At the end of the
But
day.
it's not.
The last $9.5 million of construction.
Right, so Marcus, so contingencies wouldn't necessarily hit to the end? That's what your concern is?
No, I'm saying if we are under budget, what happens to the amount that we're under budget?
Comes back to the project.
But I don't think that's the way it's worded in this agreement, right? That's where I'm confused, right? It says that the last 9.5 is being paid, so if there isn't a last 9.5, there's only a last 8, what happens to the other $1.5 million?
There has to be a last 9.5, right? The project is more than 9.5. At some point, there will be 9.5 remaining on the project, and at that point, that's when 550 King Street's obligations kick in.
But we already said we had to spend all of our money first.
No, we didn't.
No, we didn't.
I thought that's what it said earlier.
Just trying to read the agreement where that would be listed. I don't, doesn't speak directly to that.
So, Mark, I think we had talked a little bit about this today, and we had made an adjustment to what's before you now on that. So I think that is, and I will defer to town council, is item number 3. And so, item number 3, I'd be happy to read it for everybody, but in exchange for reallocation of grant funds to qualified projects, the developer shall pay the town a total of $9.5 million. Payment of such funds shall be made within 14 days of the request in writing by the town, which request shall be made, may be for a portion of said funds or the entirety thereof, and provided, however, the town shall not request any payments until all town funds have been expended, leaving only $9.5 million complete for the
I think Mark
construction.
is saying the
But it
phrase
says all town
town
funds. So it says we expended everything except 9.5.
So we could strike the phrase all town funds and just say, we shall not request any payments until only $9.5 million to complete the construction of the LCSSD remain.
I'd probably defer to town council.
Yeah, we definitely want, that's, that,
If you want to strike something, I think you only need to strike all.
Okay. That makes sense.
until, so it would say town shall not request any payments until town funds have been expended, leaving only $9.5 million.
Yeah.
To
Yes.
complete the
To complete the
construction of the LCSSD, okay? Yeah.
Okay. With this, I want to make sure that this meets, this obviously has to be approved on your side as well, Mr. Lapoli, and I want to make sure that that language is,
Yeah, I think what we'd like to do, because respectfully, this is something that has been negotiated for a number of months, and only in the last 24 hours has things kind of turned out the way they are today. You know, we want to emphasize and stress that we wouldn't be here without the town of Littleton, and hopefully you feel the same way. But within a very small window, everything has changed. and all we're looking to do is learn, understand. We want to understand what your position is, so we can process that, because our lawyers just received this document only a few hours ago, at best, and we're a little, like, confused. So what we'd like to do is understand, what the town thinks, allow us to kind of process it, and allow us to ask questions before this meeting is over, as it pertains to the entirety of the project, future opportunities that are created between both organizations, the town and 550 King Street LLC, as far as grants or earmarks, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense?
It does. I just want to make sure that any language in this, we at least have we've agreed upon in principle, and I believe we could probably agree as a board that if we get this language where we're comfortable with it, that unless there's significant changes to what we break this down to, we would allow Ryan to be the signator on this MOU.
I'd like to answer questions.
Yeah.
Or ask
Oh,
questions
absolutely.
before then.
Yeah.
So just to be
fine
clear,
with
I'm
all
not
being strict.
questioning whether we should get the $1.5 million back. I'm just questioning the actual process. I mean, if we say the sewer cost 47 and that's what it costs, then that's different. And the extra goes to the infrastructure. That's a conscious decision. But we should understand what decision we're making. That's all.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Whatever the last 9.5 is what that 9.5 is gonna go towards it.
Right, but Mark's point is good. It says all town funds, and all town funds, 47 minus 9.5.
You have to
so-
start gold plating things
Yes, right. They do have to spend the
in order
money.
to finish spending the money.
I understand.
I guess the only thought I would have is, and Rick, correct me, can you hear me, Rick?
Through the chair, please, Mr. LeBold.
Yep. Yeah, I can hear you, Sal.
Is it okay to talk from here?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, you make a very good point, and I'm just, because this is happening in real time. So if the project, and I'm not sure any project comes in under budget, but having said that, you brought the question up. So if the entire project comes under budget, shouldn't we share in both of that? Because we're paying a percentage of that 47 million, so if it comes in at 46 million, theoretically, there should be a value to you and a value to us based on the initial agreement we made of this 62%. Am I saying it the wrong way, Rick?
No, I think that's fair, but I also think we might be talking about a theoretical, it's not gonna happen. But in concept, I think it's a totally reasonable thing to say. I mean, if you exaggerate and say that the project came in at $30 million, significantly less than all of us thought, which isn't gonna happen, but that the percentage, on a percentage basis, how much you pay versus the town should be the same as agreed upon, but I just think it's not gonna happen, so it's probably not, warrant discussion for much longer than this.
Karen?
Along the lines of things that aren't going to happen. Tom, what happens if this project is abandoned in the middle?
Which project are you referring to?
The project as defined.
The
Sewer-
Littleton Commons
sewer-
Smart Sewer District project
sewer
as
project.
defined in the agreement.
So now the sewer department, so Light and Water abandons the project?
Yeah. We build half of it, and for reasons unknown, we decide we can't go through with it. What happens?
We don't get a sewer.
Well,
That part's clear. I didn't need town council for that part.
Are you saying that you would like to see at least a sentence in here that speaks to that? I mean, where do you want to, what's the,
I'd like to understand where we would be based on this agreement. I'm not necessarily asking for changes, I'm asking where we would be if that were to happen. Perhaps the answer is we're in such a state that we don't need any changes, I don't know, but that's why I'm asking council.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure we can abandon the project once we sign contracts.
yeah, we'd be in court.
Yeah, we'd be in court. Yeah.
Town council is ready.
Sure, town council, please, if you would. Tom?
sure. So if we abandon the sewer project somewhere in between, So we'll have a half-constructed sewer project, but we would also have a lawsuit with the contractor who is likely entitled to the profit he would have made on the entire project.
Sure.
So we get ourselves in that hot water too. But I'm just speculating. Is your question, if we abandon it before we get to the 550 King Street's $9.5 million contribution, would we then get something from them?
No, my question is more tied to how the MOU works along with the reservation agreement and the betterment fees. I guess, I'm not seeing any acts of God clauses or anything like that that might be in the construction contracts, I don't recall, but I just want to make sure that we're all subject to the same provisions in terms of catastrophic happenings.
So this is, so this agreement is strictly a funding agreement. It explains how we're going to use grant funds.
The MOU does, correct. But
Right,
we're
the
also
reservation-
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, you go ahead.
We're also discussing a sewer capacity betterment agreement, correct?
No, we voted on that Monday.
That was just added, I think, to the packet.
The sewer, so
subject language.
the capacity reservation agreement is between the water commissioners acting as sewer commissioners and 550 King Street. It's the select board is not a signatory to that. And it's not something that they act on. So I included both in the package because the negotiations involved both documents. But the select board's document is the MOU and the water commissioner's document is the reservation agreement.
Okay, that sort of answers my question then. I'm unclear on the status of this document, though, the sewer betterment agreement. Has it been executed?
No.
Not this one.
But but at this point, the idea is that we have voted on the agreement that was, there's no substantial changes.
Right, we agreed that as long as there's nothing substantial here, I mean, the water commissioners, we gave Nick full authority, which he didn't really need from us, but this was more of a recommendation and awareness for us, correct?
I'm sorry.
Okay, I should say, we voted to support
Right.
Yes.
the agreement, support
Right.
Light and Water,
Right.
subject to town council coming to this agreement. So I think that's, out of courtesy, that's why I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, I think that's why it was included, because there was that condition that as long as Tom supported it. Obviously, Tom supports it, he created the document, and our vote was just one of support, it wasn't one that we execute, or a signatory.
And if I may, for the LELWD board, what they voted separately at that joint meeting was that they voted subject to review and approval by town council of waiving any provision of the Board of Commissioners applicable betterment policy if necessary. So basically, they are moving forward with the capacity agreement, which is also here, before LELWD. So the question, and this is up to the LELWD board as well, I think of the MOU and the capacity agreement as complementary documents. So, theoretically, and I would defer to town council on this, the LELWD board could approve of that this evening, potentially. All right, that sound right, Tom? Yeah.
Yep. So I think for 550 King Street, both contracts are a package.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So just for clarity, the Light and Water Board and Mr. LaPoli, you're fine on what's in the capacity agreement as it is structured. It's just the MOU, the terms that we're really concerned about at this point.
We're fine with the capacity that was awarded to us. We asked for 200, we were given 150, we get it.
Yeah.
So that part, we are in agreement with on the capacity.
And the document that was presented as the capacity agreement, you're okay with?
I think we'd like to finish listening to the board. And
I'm contingent on the MOU, I'm not saying,
I think, yeah, I think we want to listen, right? And we want to study the document a little. We just got the document.
that's
And
fair.
there was some significant changes from where we were 48 hours ago. And we continue to work hard with the LEWD. Nick's been great, and it's been a little work in progress. So I think what we're really anxious and to understand is this package, and you said it great, these two packages, they go together. And it's really important to us to understand your thoughts on the tri-party agreement or any other MOUs from this.
Any further, there's more comment?
Yeah, are we confident that the work we're going to do with the $9.5 million falls under a qualified project as it's defined?
I think I could speak to that. So the monies are coming in via MassWorks, and we would need to follow all those rules within the MassWorks program, but we believe that it would be crafted in a way that would allow us to make that happen and make that work.
And so obviously it goes through the bid process and uses prevailing wage and everything else that is required by any municipal expense on a municipal project.
The project essentially goes through the town of Littleton.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Town Council has his hand up.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, so just for the record, so we did have an opportunity to touch base with some of the people at the MassWorks grant program today, and generally described how it would be used, and they seem comfortable with the approach.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Is the letter of credit going to be written against some institution that isn't Lupoli Company, a bank?
Well, we contacted our bank late yesterday, early this morning. Unfortunately, today's Friday, and we haven't been able to speak to any of our lenders, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, okay. But the intention is it would be drawn against, it would be a letter of credit against, some institution that isn't just Lupoli.
That's
Correct.
And just to point out to the board, the hope is that the letter of credit wouldn't even be necessary.
Of course.
That we're basically, it's there as an insurance policy to protect the town, but in terms of what's being proposed is that we would just be working with the Lupoli Company on that last 9.5 million and it would go through smoothly.
Mr. Chair, can I ask Mr. Venuti or FinCom if they have any comments on this arrangement?
You may, and I can ask them too if you like.
Mr. Venuti or Mr.
Before you
Oh, sure,
do
yeah,
that,
yeah.
if you read paragraph 3, it actually does say it's subject to approval by town council and bond council as well, so that letter of credit would have, and bond
Okay,
council has been
okay,
involved in
good.
these conversations as well to say,
Good, thank you.
yeah.
But my question stands to Steve and to FinCom members who are here. If you have any, through the chair, obviously, if you are familiar with this proposed arrangement and are comfortable with it.
Yep, we went through the past few days and had a lot of questions for the MassWorks people and the state to make sure, and bond council to make sure everything was going to be okay in our point of view. And yes, we're covered with this letter of credit, so adding that letter of credit in here was very key to this happening.
Thank you.
Steve, you're not bouncing checks over there.
Alvin, are you?
That's not good for the FinCom to be bouncing like that.
Alvin, has FinCom been paying attention to this as well?
I have not seen the documents that are being discussed. I'm here to kind of hear what's going on, and then I was going to request the documents afterwards.
Thank you.
Let's keep going through the chair, guys.
Yeah, we don't.
I tried, and you said.
You can't just solicit information. If you want to speak, they'll raise their hand and speak.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have one question for Tom. In the betterment document, you have the commissioners executing this. I believe we authorized the general manager
Yes.
to be able to execute the betterment agreement. So I assume that that's not an issue, correct?
Not an issue for me, I can make that change.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so what, what gets us back here, if we give authority to the town administrator to execute this document on our behalf, what gets us back in here if the Napoli companies, after further review of this, before your signature, some significant change would take place where perhaps we would have to meet again? Is that fair to say?
I think so. I would defer to town council on that in terms of how we could set this up, but it certainly would be within the board's right to assign that responsibility to me, absent any substantive changes.
Right.
I think that's perfectly acceptable. I mean, it's, as we've said, we were negotiating this yesterday afternoon and then, kind of immediately turned to drafting, and I think I got it to Stephen Rodman around 2 o'clock today. So they haven't had time to really digest it. We barely had time to write it and think about it. So we need to give them, the time to read it and respond to it, but we need to keep this thing moving as fast as we can at the same time. So I think I would suggest that a good way to do that is to authorize Ryan to sign on behalf of the board. And I think between Ryan and I, we have a good sense of, when we're starting to color outside of the lines and need to come back to the board for additional approval.
If I may, having been privy to many of these conversations, including yesterday, this seems to, Tom, at least at first blush, again, we've all mentioned that it's been kind of under the gun, we've just had a short time to review this, but it seems to have captured the intent and the essence of what was discussed yesterday. And I don't foresee any painting outside the lines, frankly, based upon what you've captured. The language that Mark caught, I think is a good catch, but just in principle, I think we'll be doing right by authorizing Ryan to have the authority to sign this on our behalf.
Mr. Chair, may I ask 2 more questions?
Yeah. Is this the town council or in general?
In general, to go back to the betterment agreement, or the way in which the 2 agreements work together. The last version had a payment schedule.
I think I can maybe explain that.
This version does
to
not.
So the payment schedule was in some of the earlier drafts because there was discussion about the Napoli companies paying a reservation fee, 50% fee. And I look at my shaking his head, so Jim, thank you. So in this case, we're basically falling on how it's a standard, because that went away, and as part of the negotiations, this is basically a standard betterment that is being paid by the Napoli company per Mass General Law. Mm-hmm. So as such, those same rules apply in this instance and thus don't require a separate payment schedule.
And so, for those of us uninitiated in typical betterment agreements for sewer capacity, what is the payment schedule?
Let's see. I want to defer to Mr. Venuti on that one in terms of what the payment schedule was. If I may, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, please. So if anyone's privy to that, Steve or Nick on the payment schedule.
So the total cost of the project get divided amongst all the users based on their usage of the sewer system. In this case, with Napoli Company, they're doing 455 REUs, which turns out to be somewhere around 62% of the total cost of the project. So that total cost is divided. The user has the option to pay either upfront or over the life of the longest loan, which is, in this case, 30 years. So we could have some people pay upfront without penalty, or throughout the life of the project.
Is it prorated by, is it necessarily an even amount over 30 years, or is it at the payer's discretion, whether they make a balloon payment?
I believe they have that option to do that, but generally, if it would be 1/30th each year, that's the way they opt to do it.
And that's per.
It's interesting you just asked. Can you-
This through the chair.
I
Keep going,
apologize.
thank you. Oh, you- please.
It's interesting that Chairwoman, asked that question. Can we understand what she just said? I've never heard that response of the balloon payment. Can you teach me what that means, please?
So, yeah, I think basically, when we set up a betterment payment, if you owe $5,000 in your betterment, you have the right to pay the $5,000 up front, if you were so inclined. It's paid, and you're done. So, the town basically recognizing that some of those charges may be very large for different entities, then would basically works it out over a 30-year payment schedule.
Well, the life of whatever that
The life of-
bond,
Right,
if it's
bond,
20-year, 30-year, right,
Right.
right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if I may. But my question was, does it necessarily have to be equally apportioned over 30 years? And if not, who would decide that and
Right.
using what type of instrument?
This is all part of the SRF, correct?
Right.
It does need to be equally apportioned
Okay.
by statute.
Okay, thank
State
you.
law.
We don't have an option then.
Okay, thank you.
So just to understand, Chairman, to Chairwoman's question, am I saying it selectwoman? I apologize.
Select board member.
Karen.
Usually we have some nameplates here, and Karen,
Yeah.
that's the first time.
We do have them, but
And I
just
do
can't read them?
apologize, Karen.
No worries.
So to Karen's point, she's, the word balloon payment was mentioned. Is that not the case? Or is there discretion?
Oh, there's discretion. The idea of it is that if someone had monies to pay up front, that's not a requirement. It's an option for the party.
Balloon
that's-
payment in the front?
Balloon
Yeah,
up front.
right, that's right,
Yeah.
that's right.
Is there a
But not
balloon
at the
payment
end.
in the back?
There is not.
No.
Okay.
No.
Correct, Tom? Sorry.
No,
Jake.
state statute.
Equally apportioned.
But, and I'm going to add just one more little twist to that. If the individual or corporation wants to pay it up halfway through them and say, I want to get rid of this right now, they're allowed to do that as well, correct?
No prepayment penalty.
There's no prepayment penalties or anything like that on these type of loans?
No.
Okay, all right, so, thank you. Please.
Chairman, Tom, if these equal payments were spread over 30 years, and you decided, and these payments were established, does it act like a mortgage, Tom? Or if you paid a substantial amount in year 10, does the balance get recalculated, or are you obligated to continue the same payments, although your time would be shortened? Does that change? Do you
So-
understand, Tom?
Yeah, I understand. So we actually briefly discussed this yesterday, and I still don't have an answer for you. But I'll tell you, I think the answer is, so for instance, you're paying on 455 REUs. If in year 10, you made a payment that could pay off 200 REUs, I think that we would then take that, use it to pay off the 200 REUs, and then you would be recalculated to pay the remaining 255 REUs, so your payment would go down. But I need to confirm that. Does that make sense?
Yes, Tom, thank you.
So that is different than a mortgage.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. The acquired ownership interest for the projects, I assume that refers to roadways and/or eventually will be town-owned roadways, is that correct? Or are there other considerations?
If I could, Mr. Chair, I believe Rick's on the call, and Rick, if you want to speak to that.
Yep, sure. Hi, everybody.
Okay.
So the requirement is that the public has an interest in the property, and what we've done in other communities where maybe the town doesn't necessarily want to own the roads and the maintenance and everything else that's associated with it, is we establish a permanent public easement for access, pedestrian access and utilities that go through the site. So essentially, it functions as public ways. It is a public way, but not a town-owned street, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
And that's a tool that, that we've used in other communities using MassWorks funding as well. And in the application, it's actually a box that you can check to satisfy the public land requirement.
And an add-on to that, I guess for the water commissioners, are there other potential projects besides roads that we're considering using this funding for? And if so, how would the ownership be manifest? Ownership interest.
I'd push that back to Rick.
Yeah.
Working on that.
Okay.
Yes. Is it okay to answer, Mr. Chair?
Sure, please.
Yep, sure. So, we commonly just call it roads, right? But roads usually include everything between the edges of the public interest, so in this case, the easement boundaries. So it would include streets, curbing, pavement, landscaping, lighting, utility work, right? Bring basically like water loop through the site. It might include gravity sewers that tie into the town system. So it would be any utility or streetscape item within the boundaries of the public easement, but nothing beyond.
Thank you.
Anything on private land is not eligible for the MassWorks
Okay,
funding.
thank you. That makes sense. That's all I have.
Chairman, and Rick, since we just got the document, in paragraph 2, it talks about ownership. Should it say easement, Rick?
So can I jump in?
Yes, please.
It says ownership interest, so that encompasses an easement. It signifies some level of ownership, so that we can tick that box, but it's not meant to include fee simple ownership. That would encompass the easement that Rick has described.
Thank you, Tom. And we're all here asking questions. You can see that we're asking questions for the first time because we didn't have the answers or the understanding or the opportunity.
Oh, yeah, no, completely fair.
Did you have more? I thought you felt like you had more.
I'd just like to understand, and Ryan, Ryan, forgive me if I miss during your summary, but how did we get here? So how did we get from an agreement on Monday that we thought was pretty much done to?
Right. So there were a few things that were before you on Monday night. So remember that the sewer contracts themselves are under the purview of the LALWD board, right?
Yeah,
So
sure.
we wanted to have, because this involves both parties, so the vote that was taken by the select board at that meeting on Monday was a vote, and I gotta go back to it just so I'm checking the right document, but basically it was a vote of support for LALWD to authorize the LALWD general manager to execute a contract with both construction contracts. And that would be contingent on the Board of Water Commissioners executing a reserve sewer capacity agreement. So what you have before you are two things. The first is the reserve sewer capacity agreement in terms of what that has been developed into. So that's before you now. That is not what the board tonight would vote on. That is under the purview of the LALWD board. We're in agreement with that, right? So that's their piece, and that was something that we worked on. A separate document in terms of what changed was when we were sort of working this through with the Foley companies, then this other question of the 9.5 million came up in the application of that. So what you have before you is a separate document, is a memorandum of understanding as it relates to the handling of that. And so that's a separate piece that we're bringing to your attention tonight. So, because that is the town component for how we fund that project. And that part relates to us. The sewer contracts relate to the LALWD board and having that reservation capacity. Okay?
If I can jump in, and by doing this, it gives the protection necessary, and I think a number of us have said we want to make sure that we're protected, right? Mm-hmm. So this gives us all parties some level of protection.
Right. Yeah, the new piece, to answer your question, is the MOU related to the 9.5 million, hence why we conducted this as an emergency meeting, but also trying to keep things moving because that's tied right to the sewer contracts, which, again, are ready to go and move forward. So that's you gotta have the funding to do the projects, right? So that's basically what it is. Does that answer your question?
I'm gonna mull it over.
Okay. Okay.
Sure, Mr. LaPointe.
Thank you, Chairman. That's a really good question, Karen. So let me continue to help bring clarity. Originally, the 9.5, we were under the impression that we would have access to it to be able to use to start the construction right away. Within the past 24 hours or so, it came to our attention that we would not have access to it, and this line of credit, or this letter of credit, was first talked about. And so that's where this whole program started. We were under the impression, as a result of the efforts on the community and 550 King Street, that the dollars that were brought in would be earmarked for infrastructure at 550 King Street. It was told to us that that $9.5 million could not be used as infrastructure at 550 King Street, but we will allow you with a letter of credit to access the $9.5 million. So, to your question, you're right. That's what came to light, and that's how things changed. And I think, Chairman, that might be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about that, because each one of these programs are now tied to each other. And, that might be also, first of all, does that bring a little clarity to it, Karen?
It does.
Okay. So, I think it might, Chairman, may I continue?
Please.
So, for months now, we've been trying to put a program together to start the infrastructure over at 550 King Street. We had an opportunity to sit down with the state of Massachusetts, and the state of Massachusetts is really excited about this project. It's a big deal. And so, as a result of the application that was put together and submitted on behalf of 550 King Street, we were awarded $9.5 million in two tranches. One was an $8 million grant that was given in the forward bill put in by the former administration to be directed, as you clearly articulated, with language that says 550 King Street. If needed to be clarified, it could be clarified. An additional $1.5 million MassWorks grant was given for 550 King Street with the application process that in order to receive a MassWorks grant, it has to be tied to a project. Those dollars go for the creation of that project. They go hand in hand. We'll give you X, you give us Y. Y is the project, X is the MassWorks grant. We were under the impression that 9.5, we could access it. We really can't anymore without putting up a letter of credit that I heard for the first time. And I pride myself on being an astute businessman. For the first time hearing it yesterday, I'm used to a line of credit. So we're trying to talk to our lenders, what does that mean for leverage? If we have a letter of credit, what does that mean when we come to you for phase one to start the construction? How does it affect our capital stack? Karen, the problem with this project is, and maybe COVID gets brought into this, and I hate to say it like that, but when I came in front of this board a couple of 3 years ago, our organization talked about a $6 million backstop that Lapoli companies would give to the town for sewer. Back then, the sewer estimate was not even half of what it, was less than half of what it is today. That went from a potential number of 20, 24 million to $47 million. When we were told about the $47 million, we were then told, and you owe 62% of it, which put our figure from 6 million all the way up to 27 million. We'll use that number today because that's the number we're working with. We went to the town, the state of Massachusetts, and we said, that's a lot of debt to be placed on this project, especially today, at the interest rates, at the cost of construction. How do you help us? They said, 550 King Street, Town of Littleton, if we help this project, will you move forward, Sal? Yes. Then here comes the $9.5 million, because everybody's anxious for this project to start for obvious reasons. When this project is complete, Karen, it'll represent $6 to $9 million a year in the future to the town of Littleton. Now, because there's $27 million of debt, it makes it incredibly hard to the lenders to start having a conversation. Sal, not only do you have the debt on the real estate, you've just told us that you owe another $27 million. What we'd like to discuss in the future, if the state of Massachusetts, a grant, the federal government, anybody and anyone wants to help pay down that debt of our obligation of $27 million in order to capitalize on the financing and drive that cost of that project down so we can move forward, what happens with that excess money if it's brought in? Only in the last 24 hours did that become a question of, we don't know what happens if another grant is brought to the town of Littleton. And we're here to talk about how do you guys feel about it. Yesterday, Tom brought some clarity to it. As long as it says it's earmarked just for you, Sal, and we're just a little concerned that respectfully, and it's been a confusing road. It started at one number. It's all the way up to 27. It started with access of 9.5. Now it's a letter of credit. Every time we get a little closer, respectfully, that goalpost changes a little bit. So we're just a little confused of really where do we stand as one of the biggest projects in the state right now that will represent millions and millions of dollars. How do we move forward? Does that make sense, Karen?
It does. The $9.5 million was covered in the agreement that we discussed on Monday. And it was decided that the way that it was handled in the agreement on Monday it was not.
That's because on Monday, we were still being told we would have access to the $9.5 million. But then on subsequent conversations, it was told to us, you're not gonna have $9.5 million unless you put up $9.5 million, or put up a letter of credit, or put up a line of credit, or put up a bond. And that's where all of this changed. That wasn't told to us until 24 hours ago. And I apologize, was it 30 hours ago, was it 24 hours ago? It was very recent, Karen. So we're here in good faith because we wanna move forward. This is a big deal to the town of Littleton. It can't exist without each other, but how do we do this together, Karen? And I don't know the answer right now.
Well, I think this document, this is our first document from the select board really pertaining to this, so.
Yeah.
And this
so
is.
we're in the same shoes.
Right.
We got the document 2 hours ago.
This pertains to the sewer.
But if I sign that, sir, I apologize. If I sign that, not knowing the back end of it, then I'm obligating 550 King Street to $27 million, and that is a problem. You see what I'm trying to say? I signed that agreement. What happens if we get additional funds to drive down that 27 and it never comes because the town of Littleton says, well, you're not gonna.
Yeah, it's tricky, and I know these negotiations, it's kind of outside of the scope of this meeting, and I absolutely recognize the concern that you have going forward, and there's going to be, I have to assume, over the life of this project, 10 to 12 years or more, there's going to be ample opportunity to go after more state monies for this project, and your obviously company's very good at doing that, so collectively with our town to and those are discussions we have to continue to have as our board with you and how those monies can best be spent. Now, I don't know if you're looking outside of this 9.5 in this discussion. I think it has to be treated differently. I do. Just because of the project that's at play here, and what this project represents, and how much the town has put forward. This is the document that we could craft to make this work. The rest of it going forward is going to be specific. The project's going to be moving forward now. Now, we can get into many discussions with your team on if a grant comes forward on something else, and we need to actively be working with you on that. And I think we can, we're going to have many meetings to come to some type of consensus on what exactly we can do to assist you in this massive project that's going to help you and help Littleton. So I don't want to get into specifics on, because I don't know all the grants that are going to be out there. We have no idea. If it's something that's fully generic that is going to be helping the town in other areas, there's other businesses that definitely are going to be affected by this project, for sure. But I think your point's taken on your concern that another agreement or another grant comes into play next year, year after, years down the road, that all of a sudden it turns into something else that you didn't expect, like a line of credit or something that affect. And I think I would like to think that wouldn't be the case. I think it has to be the case in this one. At least that's how it's being explained to us right now, in the short window we have. But I don't see, unless someone up here has some other...
Mr. Chair, if I may, just to sort of reflect some of the conversation that we had yesterday. I mean, some of the issues that we've had with the 9.5 million was a little bit about how the legislation was written and where it was signed and things like that. So I think one of the things that we talked about with the Poli companies with this is that, you know, when we move forward and when the Poli companies are specifically looking for state support on a project of this size, is that it's important that we look at what that language looks like and then make it very specific of if it is going to support, and I think what we talked about was specifically trying to offset some of the cost of, as Mr. Poli had pointed out earlier, that the betterment and their proportion of the sewer project is quite large. So as such, you know, any such benefit would be specific to that. And I think that the general spirit for which that conversation is and where we're moving forward, and this could take in many forms and MOUs or whatever other agreements, but that, you know, the both parties are being specific about it, but also working in partnership because, you know, this is going to be, moving forward, this is a partnership. Let's, you know, about what this impact is for the town and its size and scope. But it means that, you know, being specific about that and coordinating it on the front end. So.
Yeah, discussions, I think our discussions need to.
Is that an accurate check?
Yeah, as it pertains to grants, certainly. We need to get ahead of these when we're even talking about going for these grants.
But I think and I think you captured it, Ryan, but I'm not sure you're capturing what Ryan's putting down. If the Poli companies is instrumental in getting an additional funding source, whether it be a grant, a loan, or loan forgiveness, whatever it happens to be, but it comes to this project, or comes to the town as a result of actions taken by the Poli companies, which is exactly why we're having a conversation about the MOU right now. That money would, you know, like that number, at least the $8 million for sure would not have been in our laps without the Poli companies and relationships that Mr. Poli has with the State House. But let's say the Poli companies leverages those relationships and is able to get an additional $6 million, $8 million, whatever the number is. I think as long as the grant application or whatever application is written in such a way, and this is what Tom kind of brought up yesterday, that we specifically say it's to be used for infrastructure on a public-private partnership at 550 King Street, then it absolutely should be.
That makes a lot of sense. I think I was getting a little more hung up on grants. I don't want to restrict us to grants that are outside of 550 King Street, maybe pertain to this project when we're talking about a lot of other stuff that's going on.
I think it's important for the board.
Absolutely.
I think it's important for the board to understand as we're working in that kind of partnership that I don't want to speak for Napoli companies, but you know that there are benefits potentially to the town as well in terms of what other grant opportunities or relationships that
Absolutely.
we have as well. Because again, this is a big project for us, just as it is a big project for Napoli companies. And again,
It's a big project for the state.
right. So it doesn't. It's going to be dynamic, and we have to recognize that coming into it and approach it as such.
And there may be grants out there that, like I said, a little more broad, that would probably make more sense, okay, to the likelihood of 62% would go to the Napoli companies. If it's based on
Different
more broad.
ways, and I think, I don't want to speak for Mr. Napoli,
Yeah.
but I think he's just trying to make sure that
Understood.
those considerations are given by the board when you're moving forward, which.
I'd like to hear any other kind of take on this.
So
This is
I'll go. So,
forward thinking.
So I fully support the spirit of this MOU. I don't necessarily support this revision, having only seen it 2 hours ago like you did. I'm not sure that I'm ready to give Ryan permission to go and sign it. I would rather actually give permission for Ryan to go and continue the negotiation and bring something back to us that we also vote on again, because I also think that gives more support to Mr. Lapoli, that he sees that we're voting for it, and we're not questioning it later. So I would prefer having another meeting to vote on that. Having said that, I think if we go back a little bit more history, when we actually got the 9.5, we applied for a $19 million grant. We only got half of what we asked for, right? And because we got only half of what we asked for, that's where the confusion and where the money started from, in my opinion, right? Because we knew that the sewer was going to need more, and we thought there was going to be more outside of the money that they needed for infrastructure. And then we've been kind of in the scramble mode since then. I will commit to you from as much as I can that we should sit there and figure out what grants there are and sit down and go after them together and figure out when we apply for the grant, how it will be apportioned between your needs and the town needs. And I'll sign all of those agreements and stick to them based on what we're doing. The way we did it on this one got messed up, right? Because we said 19.5 and the sewer needs a chunk of it, and we worded it wrong, we did it wrong, in my opinion. And that's partially on us, right? That everyone had different expectations, but I am fully committed to making this go forward, on some sort of an MOU, in the spirit of what's here, not necessarily what's here, but yes.
So from my point of view, I think I'm probably more ready to allow Ryan to sign this than Mark is, but I also want to affirm that I'm 100% committed to working with you in any fashion that you think is necessary to find funding or any other source of financial support that we need to give you to make this project happen. I've been enthusiastic about this project from the beginning. I continue to think it's a good thing for the town. I have no reason to think that anybody is doing anything malicious here. I think it's very clear that we have a demonstrated need for the money and you have a demonstrated need for the money. And it feels like this is the best way that we can both get what we need so far. So maybe there's another solution or maybe there isn't, but going forward, I'm with Mark on absolutely being willing to work with you and Lou Poli on what you need to do to make this happen. Just so you know.
Thank you.
But not Barry.
Please.
So, all we'd like is an opportunity to discuss with our council and really the lenders, right? Because 24 hours ago, I didn't know how a letter of credit would impact my ability to lever the real estate. And that is especially in today's times, with today's lending. Imagine you have $9.5 million you're gonna pour into a project. Now you have to understand what a letter of credit does to the impacting of the funding. And I'm not really sure, Gary, Chairman, on that.
Okay.
So that's something we...
Yeah, and if I may, I mean,
That's
that the way that if we were to do, if LALWD were to vote this evening on the sewer agreement and the board were to vote on the MOU, they would both be contingent because, as Mr. Polik points out, that his town council still, or his council still needs to review the documents, and they're a signatory on it as well. So we need to give them the opportunity to be able to review it. What we're trying to do, and why we're here tonight, is to be able to expedite this in reflecting the sewer agreements.
Sure. So
Trying to keep it moving. So.
And that's what I'm looking for the board, obviously, to vote tonight as written, this document to approve this MOU. Now, Mark, to your point, if there's changes that affect this document outside of pen and ink changes, if you're more comfortable with it coming back to the board in an emergency meeting again.
I would prefer coming back in another meeting. I would tell you that I'm 100% in favor of signing it, but I'd also, I mean, there's still that, my question on what happens if the project comes in less. There's just, without your counsel and your lenders having a chance to look at it, I expect there's going to be changes to this. So I just feel more comfortable having it come back and us giving the affirmative rather than Ryan just giving the
So
affirmative.
I'd rather empower Ryan to rather than us, just to keep it moving forward.
Yeah, I think the success of this relationship has always been, from day one, a level of transparency. And I am willing to do whatever is best that this board thinks, because we want to make sure we maintain that transparency. This is a big deal. This is serious stuff here.
Yeah.
You know, and I want the board to feel comfortable.
Thank you. I'd just like, I mean, this may be something we have to vote on as far as, you know, I would look for a motion to give the town administrator authority to execute this document as it's written. Just, that's why we're here today. So if something changes significantly, obviously, we're gonna have to come, it's gonna have to come back to us, and he wouldn't be able to sign that without, you know, when we're talking about significant changes or whatever. But I think for expediency, if this document, if you're comfortable with this document and how it was explained by town council, let's at least move this document forward, and then if we have to come back Tuesday, because obviously a lot of changes have been made, then we do it. But I think if we're just talking pen and ink, wording, things, maybe you present it to us, back to us. Would the board like to reconvene based on these changes? You can poll the board.
So here's another question. What if we approve the document as written, and then you know that we will be moving forward, and if you come back and say, you know, we need X, Y, and Z changes, then he's already got an approval on something, but he doesn't like it for some form. We come back and we can even do this at our next regular meeting, because he already knows he has our approval.
If I may, Mr. Chair, we can't wait to the next meeting, so.
No,
that's.
No, I'm saying you're not gonna get it.
So if I may, so the way that we would propose that it be written for the motion to go forward is that, you know, it would be, the MOU would be approved, and this is a typical thing that we do, so that we would say that the MOU be approved, pending that there are no material changes to the MOU. So if we're making, you know, if we're making some small adjustments here and there, that's fine. I mean, I think that, you know, I don't want to take this right away from the board, but I certainly, if there were any material changes that I was approving of, it might be my last act here in town. So I don't want that to happen either. So yeah, you know, no, I mean, I think we're doing, you know, I think we want to set this up so that if there are changes that come back, that, you know, that again, we can query the board to say, I think you made a good point, but to say, like, okay, are these things material enough that we need to have another meeting? We can do that. So, and I would not.
So I think we're saying the same thing, Mark.
Right, but I mean, but if it's set up to go, the idea of this is to set it up to go and move forward, because again, we are trying to deal with the fact that we've got 2 sewer projects here that are ready to go, and
Contracts need to be signed.
and contracts need to be signed. So that's it. And it isn't uncommon that we've set up agreements like that. So presuming that there aren't any material changes, and it's something I'd work on with the board and town council to make sure that there wouldn't be. But at the same time, the polling companies have the right to look at it and get back to us with concerns and things and changes they want to see too. So we're just taking this as a means to put this in their lap to be able to then move forward with it and review it.
All right, let me hear Mr. Faulkner from FinCom.
Yeah, I'm a little bit confused. What was the time sensitivity to call a emergency meeting? Why are we here tonight?
Right.
That's the first
I
question.
Mr. Chair, I could take
Please,
this down.
go ahead.
Sure. So, Fred, right now, we have 2 contracts that have been bid out.
Yep.
One contract is the wastewater treatment plant,
Yep.
and the other contract is for the sewer collection system. So those 2 go hand in hand. Roughly speaking, both contracts are just south of about $20 million. So we've already... Each, I'm sorry, thank you. Yes, each. Okay. So as such, we're at a juncture with this project where, the town has to do a sewer project. The sewer project has to be able to provide a collection system and a treatment plant for the town, as well as for the 550 King Street development.
So long story short, we need to do something with the contracts.
Yes. Well, right, yes.
Okay, so if we have to do something with the contracts, is there anything that the select board is discussing cause agita for either of those contracts?
That's why we're here, yes.
If it does, then we need to get the select board, and I don't know whether Mr. Lapoli has to be in that loop or not, but sounds like the reason we're here is because there's a time sensitivity on the contracts. Is there anything that the Board of Selectmen is doing or talking about jeopardizing the time sensitivity of the contracts?
If we did not, in other words, if we did not give Ryan the authority, or we vote on this right now, the approval, he would have to set up we'd have to wait for another meeting after Mr. Lapoli's attorneys, everybody looked at this and blessed off on it, or not, or they had to come back to us. If they have to come back to us, then we're gonna have to do another emergency meeting unless it's not a significant change.
So what does
that holds up their contract?
And if I may, Mr. Chair, understand this isn't a one-sided piece. This is both. There has to be signatories by the town and by the Lapoli companies on this.
Yeah, I don't want to deliberate on that piece of it, Fred. But
right. So that the idea of tonight is to be able to then say that these things can be, again, handed off to the Lapoli companies, that they can talk to their council and determine how they want to proceed. So does that make sense?
Yeah, this is just beginning to smell like the last 2 town meetings where major decisions, where we were asked to make major decisions 5 minutes before town meeting. And I don't know, it just...
Yeah, I mean, I am going to look for a motion.
I'm not quite ready yet. I have another question. The contingency on our votes on the contracts are subject to this agreement, is that correct?
So remember, in terms of the contracts...
I'm sorry, not the
contracts are under the purview of the LELWD.
So that's the reservation.
Right.
Gives them authority to grant contracts.
Actually, if I could, Matthew, through the chair, and this is maybe a question for town council in terms of how we would structure this. So my proposal to you would be to first vote on vote on the MOU, because that's the first base, and then up to the LELWD board, but for them to then vote on the reserve sewer capacity agreement. So I would defer, but
Yeah,
what do you
just
think?
interject, Mr. Chair. We've already authorized Nick to move forward. We're not going to vote.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine, that's fine.
Yeah, we've already
That's fine.
done that.
But I think you were here as a courtesy with the board to be able to then
Exactly,
wait for that
absolutely.
approval.
Yeah,
So,
we're here, yeah.
so as such, then the only vote would be the MOU at
Right.
this point, right?
Right.
Does that seem, town council, does that seem reasonable?
So, just sorry, so I can understand, the contracts could be signed right now by the water department, if they wished. Is that correct?
We don't have the executed reservation.
We need the reservation
Well,
agreement.
But that's not up to us.
Correct.
Right.
Okay, so
exactly.
if you had the executed reservation agreement, you could sign the contracts right
Correct.
now.
No, they could sign even without the agreements, you're just preferring to
Okay,
wait.
but.
Well, yeah, that's big risk.
But what I'm getting to,
Okay.
but what I'm, wait, hold on.
I'll let you speak. Everyone's jumping in. Right, please.
What I'm getting to is, this agreement is the $9.5 million, and that is what we're talking about before moving forward. So between Lapoli companies and the select board, in order for everybody to be comfortable moving forward, we have to resolve $9.5 million. The contracts, obviously, it would be ideal if we resolve that first, but they're not specifically linked together legally. Is that correct?
If I may, Mr. Chair. So
Why not?
I never like to correct any of the chairs of any of my boards, but I would note that the vote that was taken Monday was that LELWD said that their vote in support of the two contracts was subject to, well, let me find the right piece here, was basically once the reserve sewer capacity agreement has been executed. So that, that has been revised, so the question would be, and Jimmy,
Subject to town council's approval.
town council's approved, so.
This is coming from town council.
That's fine.
So
That's fine,
he
yeah.
approves it
Mhm.
in such, whether it's a word change or a drastic change.
That's fine. That's
Town
fine.
council approves it.
That's fair.
We
Fair
agree
enough.
with town council.
Okay.
He protects us.
Okay, just want to make sure,
Yes, sir.
everybody's aware of it and the people who are watching.
And this is all, but that, you're talking about the reservation.
Reservation,
agreement.
right,
Correct.
yeah, right.
You're correct.
Correct. So as such, it sounds as if presuming town council is okay with that, they're presenting that to us, and that tonight's approval would be for the MOU.
Right, and again, the MOU and the reservation agreement are legally not linked in any way.
Town council?
Could you, Matthew, I'm having trouble hearing.
I'm sorry, the reservation agreement and the MOU are not legally linked in any way. There is no dependency between those two documents legally.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted to know.
Did you, if I may, Matthew, did you say you maybe had a draft motion?
No, I did not.
I could take a stab at that if that is the desire of the chair.
I have to say, I would look for a motion.
I can, do you mind, I may try this, and again, I say this for town council, but for the MOU would be moved to authorize the town administrator, Ryan Ferrara, to execute the memorandum of understanding between the Littleton Select Board and 550 King Street LLC, pending there are no material changes to the MOU document.
So,
Do we need to take into account that change in section 3, paragraph 3?
Please, yeah, as amended with the elimination of the word all in section 3.
So it's been, motion's been made.
Alan's been having his hand up. Do we want to take him before he actually proceed?
I've got a few hands up.
I can comment afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go.
All right, I have a motion. I'm going to hold the motion. Alan,
No, I can comment afterwards. You guys
is it okay? Do you have anything that's going to perhaps change the motion, the discussion of the motion?
So possibly.
Please speak then.
FinCom hasn't seen the documents, and we haven't had the opportunity to go back to what was voted on by town for the overall project to see if there's any implications there at all. So my request is just that FinCom is notified when items that have financial implications are being discussed, that we're included in those conversations so we can provide guidance. I think the comments and the questions asked today are good and cover everything, but FinCom, I'm just requesting that FinCom gets a copy of the documents to take a look at.
That's duly noted. So I think we've been relying so heavily on Steve that we probably get a little taken away from that. I believe that this executive session, not executive session, this emergency meeting probably should have pulled FinCom into this meeting to get a quorum on their side.
Really noted.
Going forward on any of these, I thank you.
Yeah, I will second the motion.
I do have a move in second. I would like to hear from Mr. Sanders.
Mr. Chairman, quick question. Normally, a bid is good for a certain period of time. How much time is left on this bid? I haven't heard anybody say anything about that, because that is key.
Negative 30 days.
Yeah.
I'll let Mr. DaCosta, he's been in on these meetings, so I'll let him speak to this.
Light and Water was, in theory, we should have signed a contract at the beginning of May. So that's when the contractor is expected for those contracts to be signed. Nick has been, and the commissioners have been negotiating with the contractors to buy time and, kind of kicking it out. So they're chomping at the bit. And in order for us to not have to scrap the bids and go back out to bid.
That's my concern.
Yes, we
That's right.
hats off to the commissioners and to Mr. Lawler, because they've done a good job of keeping the wolves at bay.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, that's such a thing would create a significant delay. I mean, I don't, what were we talking about, Jimmy, in terms of if we had to start from scratch again?
12 to 18 months just for the bidding alone.
Yeah.
So there's the expediency of the meeting. That kind of answers some of the questions on why now. So, thank you. All right, we do have a motion on the floor and a second. I believe the motion was from you and seconded
Me.
Annette. I look for, take the vote. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, it is unanimous. Right, so thank you. I'm going to look for a motion to adjourn.
I have one quick comment. Mr. Farrar, will you just forward us any changes at all, as soon as you know?
Absolutely fine.
Okay, whether they're material or not, I'd like to see it.
That's absolutely, that would be wrong for me to do anything else. Absolutely.
Okay, we do have a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Seconded by Matthew. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Please hit the switch.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.